It's no secret that Egypt is not the most stable country in the world. Egypt has spent most of its non-ancient history conquered by some other entity or empire. In 3000 BC, Egypt had finally unified under a pharaonic rule. Dynasty after dynasty started taking over the previous one, and finally, after 18 of these separate dynasties in around 1550 BC, Egypt had formed its own empire. This was the most powerful Egypt had ever been in history, and probably the most powerful it ever will be. Then came the foreign rulers, the Achaemenid Persians, the Macedons, the Ptolemies, the Romans, the Byzantines, the Sasanian Persians, the Rashidun, the Umayyads, the Abbasids, the Fatimids, the Ayyubids, the Mamluks, the Ottomans, and the British all conquered Egypt one after another until finally in 1922 they ended the 2,500 years of foreign rule. With a king now ruling Egypt, the power changes still never stopped. In 1953, the military took over the country, a dictator in 1956, a new dictator in 1970, and another one in 1981. It wasn't until the Arab Spring of 2011 where democracy had seriously entered the country. After some constitutional changes and shenanigans in 2012 and 2013, Egypt had finally held its first real election in 2014, and for the first time in Egyptian history, the people could choose their own ruler. With all these years of oppression and foreign rule, Egypt had never been a great power. It was always just a rich area of one empire or another. The Egyptian people had never unleashed their full potential, and despite thousands and thousands of years of history and being one of the first cradles of civilization, Egypt as its own power is a very new country. So instead of Egypt reinventing themselves, we can say Egypt is finally becoming its own country. How will Egypt face the future? One thing, despite all the changing regimes, wars, and chaos throughout Egyptian history has stayed the same. Egypt is not a country filled with swaths of land like seen on many maps. No, Egypt is a single strip of land called the Nile River. Egyptian farmers have always farmed beside the Nile. Egyptian cities have always been built around the Nile, and Egyptian people have always lived around the Nile. 98% of Egyptians live on only 3% of the land. The Nile is not only Egypt's blood, but its heart and its brain as well. The history of Egypt is the history of the Nile, and it's this very river that has made Egypt so easily conquered in the past. Dependence on one geographic feature mixed with the flat terrain surrounding the Nile means a foreign army could easily march through and seize the heartland of the area. The geography of Egypt is a very crucial part of why the country is so unstable nowadays. In turn, however, the Nile has given Egypt amazingly fertile lands in a vast ocean of desert. Egyptian farmers may love this, but it is the ache of the modern country's leaders. With these densely packed fertile lands mixed with a very high fertility rate among Egyptian women means Egypt is not only a new country in terms of the rulers, it's new in terms of people as well. In 1970, Egypt had a population of around 33 million people. 50 years later, today, over 100 million people call the country home. They are young too, with a median age of 26.3 years old. It will peak around 160 million by 2050, with certain areas growing much faster too. For instance, Cairo is expected to double in population in the coming decades. The leaders can look at this and think of all the military power they will have, and the businessmen can think of all the profits they can make with this new population, and those are some ways Egypt is trying to grow. When you have a nation full of working adults, the society tends to prosper. The leaders know this and will mainly use their young workforce to reinvent the country. But remember that the far majority of the population lives around a tiny strip of land, and then you'll see the problem with this population growth. This shift in population and urbanization has caused countrywide angst and chaos. The 1980s onward saw a rise in terrorist attacks. In 2011 and 2012, there were massive revolutions and revolts, and poverty recently hit an all-time high. 1/3 of all Egyptians lived in poverty in 2018. It's clear that this river has not made Egypt a stable place to live. Political and demographic instability have plagued the nation's modern history, yet there may be some hope. A young workforce means in a couple decades the nation will be filled with highly skilled workers capable of turning Egypt around. In fact, projects and economic growth have already blessed the country. Egypt was the only nation in the Middle East and North Africa to have a growing economy in 2020, dodging the COVID-19 recession and falling oil prices and securing a 2.2% economic growth rate. Their growth has only started. Throughout the 2020s, Egyptian growth and prosperity is expected to finally come. In 2016, the Egyptian government announced Egypt Vision 2030. There are 8 goals to this ambitious social projects, all hoping to be completed by 2030. Egypt 2030 is about social, economic, justice, and environmental reform brought about by the government. In short, these goals are 1. To not just lower poverty but completely eliminate it. 2. To achieve social justice, social integration, and spatial justice. 3. To build a strong economy, lowering deficits and debts while building a knowledge and innovation-based economy. 4. Improve the level of education in order to foster this knowledge and innovation. 5. To create a sustainable environment by transitioning to renewable energy and facing the effects of climate change. 6. To fight corruption by establishing adherence to laws, government, and a rule of law. 7. To establish peace and security in the nation at all levels, such as food, water, energy, political, economic, border, environmental, and anti-crime security. And 8. To maintain dominance region-wide and establish dominance worldwide through military and trade. In less than 10 years, Egypt plans to not finish one of these goals, but all of them. That is an insanely little amount of time for such a massive overhaul to an entire national system. If all these projects were to finish on time, by 2030, Egypt could become a first world nation and the leading power of the Middle East. And not all of these projects have come in the form of societal reforms. The Egyptians have been working like busy bees to build and construct some of the world's biggest projects, from the Cairo Eye, the largest Ferris wheel in Africa opening in 2022, to major upgrades to military production facilities. The Egyptians have been hard at work building new projects. The pinnacle of this building rampage is a shiny new capital city creatively named the New Administrative Capital. Hoping to boost tourism revenue in the nation, this city is planned to be filled with the greatest Egyptian spectacles since the pyramids. To name a few of the city's features, the largest mosque in Egypt, the largest cathedral in the Middle East, a park twice as large as Central Park, a theme park 4 times as large as Disney World, a technology and innovation park, a major capital airport, the Octagon, a military complex even larger than the Pentagon with more sides too, the iconic tower, the tallest tower in Africa, and even more, the centerpiece of the city, the Obelisko Capitale, a 1 kilometer tall building planning on being the world's tallest. Construction is sailing smoothly as well, with many features like the largest mosque, cathedral, a train line to Cairo, and many sectors of the city built or partially built already. Although it is being built as a smart city, it's criticized for its huge waste of water to power its major parks and green nature of the city. But I mean, what's more first world than wasting water? Other projects for diversifying the country's economy from their large oil sector are underway or have been completed. Egypt is planning to build its very first nuclear power plant, huge wind farms, and the largest solar farm in the world, which can be easily harvested in the massive sunny deserts. Egypt is a growing energy exporter in the region. Other projects include Egypt's largest medical city and Egypt's largest military base. To Egypt, size truly does matter. These mega projects are the main thing driving Egyptian growth through the tourism and construction revenues made by them. The wealth gained by them can hopefully be used so all Egyptians can prosper under the economic and social guidelines of Egypt 2030. But why now? Why is Egypt just now emerging as their major regional power and transforming into a society much like a Western one? The answer has to do with the other countries in the area. Not only is Egypt experiencing major population growth, but so is the entire Middle East. Many other countries are going through similar transitions to Egypt and expanding their force in the Middle East, coupled with the fact that Egypt is a newly free state and can finally decide for itself the direction it wants to grow. If Egypt doesn't act now, then they know they can and will be ruled by some sort of foreign entity. Just take a quick look back at their history and they'll see that being free is a very unusual occurrence. With the United States slowly backing out of the Middle East, it leaves 4 potential powers: Egypt, Saudi Arabia, a strong Egyptian ally, Iran, a semi-ally of Egypt, and Turkey, Egypt's largest rival in the region. Like Egypt, all of these other nations have some sort of powerful geographic features for trading, resources, or defense, yet Egypt is likely last or second last place here with its narrow strip of actual habitable land. In population size, Egypt is number 1. Militarily, Egypt is second, and economically is last place. With this power vacuum that the whole region knows is coming, Egypt has to act now to become a dominant force. Over the past few years, Turkey has been barking up a storm and backs it up with its bite. Like Egypt, insane population growth will transform Turkey into an industrialized, working nation. With this young, booming labor force, Turkey is expected to grow faster and even bigger than Egypt. With recent interventions in Libya, Iraq, and especially Syria, Turkey is proving their military capable. Egypt and Turkey's relationship is rocky to say the least. Hundreds of years of Turkish rule isn't going to look good to the Egyptian people, but Egypt has been trying to flex their muscles at Turkey. After Turkey invaded neighboring Libya, Egypt conducted a major naval test in the Mediterranean Sea. In addition, Egypt performs routine military exercises with the specific goal to show Turkish forces that the Egyptian army is capable. In response, Turkey will flex their might a little back for them. Political differences between the two leaderships make these two Middle Eastern nations at each other's throats, even though both have similar cultures and share the same religion. Most are from Turkish leaders calling Egypt an undemocratic tyrant state, refusing to speak to Egyptian leaders, and calling Egypt's dead president a martyr. From the other side, we have Egypt recognizing the Armenian genocide and expelling the Turkish ambassador. With these two rising powers now clashing for regional power and Sunni hegemony, it's going to create a very tense situation for the future of the Middle East. Both nations have much more in common than they do different. It's a shame to see them go down this path. Yet one candidate sticks out when thinking of potential homeowners of the Nile. If you go upstream the river, then go up even more to the Blue Nile, you'll find the mountainous lands of Ethiopia where the river spawns. The days of the starving Ethiopian are over. Instead, it has been replaced by the Ethiopian wearing a suit and walking around the metropolis of Addis Ababa. High economic and population growth have blessed the country and sits in one of the most easily defensive positions on earth. Ethiopia is East Africa's regional power, and if it continues the path it's heading on, it may be the African power. And Ethiopia has another trick up its sleeves to become a dominant regional power. Much like the Egyptians, the Ethiopians have been working like crazy making large-scale projects. Their magnum opus just might be the Grand Renaissance Dam. This 1.8 kilometer long dam will be the largest of its kind in Africa and the 7th largest worldwide. At a cost of $5 billion, 5% of the Ethiopian GDP, it's no small undertaking for the Ethiopians. In their eyes, the benefits are enormous. It is expected to produce over 16,000 gigawatt hours, enough to provide a comfortable backbone for the Ethiopian urban and rural development, and possibly even export power to nations like Kenya, Sudan, and even Egypt. Sure, the dam may be amazing for Ethiopia, but to Egyptian society it is an existential crisis. The Blue Nile accounts for 90% of the water flowing into the Nile River, and the thing about a dam is it needs to fill up its reservoir. This dam will take about 4 to 7 years to do so, and Egypt fears a loss of food production and hydroelectricity. As a country that relies on a single water source so much, Ethiopia will hold a tremendous amount of power and influence over the nations upstream. If Ethiopia ever gets into a feud with Egypt or Sudan, they can shut off their water. If Egypt sanctions Ethiopia for one reason or another, they can turn off their water. Tensions are rising and many people fear the inevitable. If Egypt were to get rid of the dam, it would cause the biggest war and humanitarian crisis of the 21st century, and nobody wants to deal with that. Ethiopia is a double-edged sword for the Egyptians. On the one hand, Egypt does not want chaos in the region as their sacred water supply is too much at risk. Egypt wants Ethiopia to deal with the Tigray militias and the Somali pirates threatening their largest trade route, the Red Sea. However, if Ethiopia is a stable and prosperous nation, the dam gives a rising power a crazy amount of influence over Egyptian society, and Egypt does not want to turn into another puppet state. With the wrong end of an imperial history and a dependence on a narrow strip of water, Egypt's future is not certain. It seems the nation is at a crossroad between success and total failure. On the one hand, building massive projects and transforming society may help them reshape the relatively new country into a regional power, yet with many nations who would love to gobble up our friend on the Nile, Egypt will have to try its hardest to survive, and if it doesn't thrive, then I'm sure it'll find its next owner soon. If you enjoyed this remake of my Egypt video, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. Thank you for watching this whole video.